Okay, I'm starting. Good evening, everyone. It is now 7:01 p.m., and I call the meeting to order. The first order of business today is to elect the chairman for the calendar year 2019 to 2020. Will someone please make a motion to nominate the chairman?
I would love to nominate our chairman, Pat Petusky, for this coming year as chairman.
I'll second it.
Thank you. The motion has been moved and seconded by Mr. Sanft. And Pat Petusky is now nominated as the Planning Commission chairman. All in favor?
How about discussion?
All right.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. All right, motion passed. Before I turn it over to Pat, I would like to just, call out a few housekeeping items for the next calendar year. We've been having this discussion on holding the commission to highest ethical standards. And so I was discussing with the chair previously too last month regarding a public hearing item that was supposed to, be heard at the commission meeting, but then now it's not happening anymore. It's just that if there is a perceived conflict of interest and I would just request you to recuse yourself if your family member is writing a report for the commission, or if your partner is working with somebody who is proposing the application. I just feel like, we do a fantastic job here, and I don't want people to hold us up just for minor reasons, which are like, petty stuff, and it just doesn't make sense, I think. And it just costs the town a lot of dollars in court cases and other stuff. Yes.
Yeah. So, my daughter is the conservation administrator in town.
Okay.
And a lot of the items that we have, we refer to her with comments. So, which probably, we're talking probably 85% of the stuff that we discussed, maybe? Mm-hmm. Yes, no, with conservation? No, not too much?
Well, I think if it's a public hearing item,
Yeah.
I would recuse myself. If it's administrative, I wouldn't. It's just that if she's writing a report and saying that she's opposing or supporting something, and you're coming here and arguing, it may look like a perceived conflict of interest because she's a direct relative, even though there's no financial gain. So just to hold all of us, each of us, to a highest ethical standard, I would just say for the public hearing items, just recuse yourself and be part of the administrative discussions.
It's not that I agree with her most of the time.
You probably don't.
Thank you. So now I will turn over the meeting to the chair, Pat Petusky, and she will select the vice chair. Elect the vice chair, actually. Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for once again voting for me to be chair. I appreciate that. And I certainly will try to have the highest ethical standards, as they say, but also to get a lot done in this next year. So we have to elect a vice chair. Do I hear a motion for, with a nomination?
Well, not to outdo myself, but I would love to nominate Jim Bigliotti for our vice chair for the year 2019.
Okay.
I would second that.
Okay, so we have a nomination and a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Yes, you do. No. And I'm not sure whether it's congratulations or condolences, but okay. Moving on. First item in our regular meeting, which is starting at 7:07. We'll start our regular administrative meeting, and we have some guests with us. We have Tina Beto and John Casey. John Casey's the town engineer, and Tina is the conservation administrator, and they're here to discuss the MS4 permit. And if I could ask if one of you could kind of give us a brief summary of what an MS4 permit is for the record.
All right, so again, I'm Tina Beto, Conservation Administrator for the town of Stratford. I'm not sure how much you guys know already about the MS4 permit, so I'll do my best to pare it down. It's like a 68-page document, so we'll work through it. But it's mandated by the US EPA, and it's a permit that ensures that stormwater entering the municipal storm sewer system is held to the highest water quality standards possible, pretty much. They want to make sure that everything getting into the storm sewer system is as clean as possible by the time it enters it. Sure, John, that'd be great. Thank you. So the terms of the permit, it actually came into effect in July of 2017 and expires on June 30th of 2022, so it's a 5-year permit. And there's specific actions that must take place throughout the life of the permit or must be completed by a given time frame during the course of the life of the permit. And so the town of Stratford registered for the permit and submitted the required stormwater management plan, which was advertised to town residents for comment. And that was essentially, the stormwater management plan is essentially a checklist for ensuring that we're meeting all of the terms of this mandated MS4 permit. So even though this permit is mandated by the US EPA, it's regulated through Connecticut's DEEP, Energy and Environmental Protection. So they're the ones that we work with directly in ensuring that we meet the terms of the permit. So as part of the stormwater management plan, the crux of it is that there's a few minimum control measures that are put in place in this stormwater management plan to make sure that we're addressing all of the conditions of the permit, to make sure that we're meeting all the conditions of the permit. So there's 6 specific stormwater management minimum control measures, so we'll go through each one of those. The first one's public education and outreach. Essentially, that's just teaching our citizens to reduce litter, don't pollute your water course, don't throw straws and bags of garbage out into our waterways and catch basins. Another big one is trying to curb nutrient input into our water courses, so fertilizers is a really big one. So encouraging citizens to use the least amount of fertilizer they need to make their lawns look pretty and, in essence, reduce that to 0 if possible and where possible. Encouraging pickup after pets, that's going to help reduce our bacterial counts in some of our impaired water courses where we often find high levels of bacteria. Lastly, for public education and outreach is looking at impacts of illicit discharges and improper disposal of waste into the MS4. So educating the public about being on the lookout for people dumping things illegally into the waterways, somebody dumping oil across the street into a catch basin, for example. Item number 2 of the minimum control measures is public participation. So by that, we try to involve the community in the planning of the stormwater management plan. So as I mentioned before, that was open to the public for comment before we actually registered for this general permit. I'm not sure if did we receive any comments from the public?
No, I don't think we got any comments. I brought a copy if anyone wants to thumb through it later, but it's also on the town website.
So we've launched it on the town website, as John said, and there was ample time for anybody in town to look it over and comment. We also, another item under public participation is involving the community in the actual implementation of the plan. So in things like Green Sweep, the annual Green Sweep that we hold every year, it's a town-wide cleanup event where we're cleaning up parks, water courses, beaches to ensure that we're doing the best we can to ensure that there's not trash getting into our waterways. Household Hazardous Waste Day is another event where we take hazardous chemicals from citizens and dispose of them properly so that they're not throwing anything like pesticides, oils down into catch basins when they don't need to. So it's an added layer of security. We also have Earth Day events where we encourage the public to come out and participate in additional cleanups or planting of beach grasses at Stratford Point. And at all those events, we stress the importance of making sure that we're taking care of our environment. Item number 3 for minimum control measures is illicit discharge detection and elimination. So this comes down to Citizen reporting is a big item in this. Again, educating our public to really let somebody know when they see illicit discharge taking place. Call into the Public Works Department, and we set a chain. We have a chain of command in place where I'll go out, assess the violation, and if need be, move forward with a violation. We keep a record of that for reporting at the end of the year. So that's one of the big items under this illicit discharge detection and elimination. We also have mandatory outfall screening. So wherever we have outfalls, we have to measure them and make sure that the levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, bacterial counts are below a certain threshold as mandated by the state. Also under the item of illicit discharge is establishing an ordinance to give the town the legal authority to eliminate illicit discharges. So as I was saying, when an illicit discharge has been reported, it's my duty to go out and see if there is in fact a violation. And now that we have the MS4 ordinance in place in town, we do have those legal teeth, if you will, to write up a notice of violation, collect fees as appropriate to mitigate the problem. But most of the time you want to work with whoever the property owner is to get it cleaned up. And this also usually involves oversight by DEEP as well. So if there's some kind of spill taking place, DEEP has to be notified. So they're part of our chain of response to something like that. Item number 4 for our minimum control measures is construction site stormwater runoff control, and the establishment of an ordinance that outlines legal authorities for actually putting that into play, making sure that we don't have stormwater runoff coming from construction sites that's polluted. This will require oversight during the permitting process by zoning, planning, possibly inland wetlands where applicable, and all those applications have to be found to be consistent with the Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual, in addition to the 2002 guidelines for soil erosion and sedimentation control. Also under this item is we typically provide, at least in the engineering department and buildings department, they provide contractors with information to ensure that stormwater is appropriately managed during construction. So there's different checklists that an applicant can go through to make sure they're meeting all the criteria of the stormwater runoff control. Item number 5 is post-construction stormwater management in new development or redevelopment. Again, that involves oversight during the permitting process through zoning, planning, or inland wetlands where appropriate, to ensure that all operation and maintenance plans for stormwater infrastructure is a condition of a permit and enforced after project completion. And also under this item is advocating for regulations that require a developer to possibly start considering the use of LID, low impact development, and using things like rain gardens, bioswales, pervious pavers, or pervious pavement to ensure that we're not overwhelming our storm sewer system. Lastly, for the minimum control measures, we have pollution prevention and good housekeeping. A lot of this falls under our own public works department. It involves employee training, especially the guys in our highways and parks department, letting them, have the appropriate training to be able to catch when there's an illicit discharge, for example, and knowing who to report it to, how to appropriately clean out catch basin and know anything that they might see in it that could possibly negatively impact our water courses. This also involves infrastructure repair, rehabilitation, and retrofits to enhance stormwater quality. Another item is tracking disconnects of directly connected impervious areas. So in town where we have, for example, a large parking lot that's town-owned, directly connected to a catch basin, and the parking lot's perhaps heavily used, I would expect there's probably a lot of oil and runoff from that parking lot that's making its way into a catch basin. One of the retrofits we might want to design is either shrinking the size of that parking lot or switching it to some kind of pervious paver system, or having the runoff go to a detention pond first before it enters a catch basin. So we want it treated, essentially, before it's entering the storm sewer system. And so it's up to the town to make those disconnects where possible, and then record them. So at the end of every permit year, we can say, we've made X amount of acres of disconnect, for example, to get credit for those items. Another item under pollution prevention and good housekeeping is reducing fertilizer use in town parks. This really isn't a problem so much. They don't use a whole lot of fertilizer on any of our town open spaces and parks. Advocating for pet waste cleanup. I think we could definitely do a better job here of getting citizens both educated and making signage where necessary to pick up after your pet. And I think a lot of people just don't understand the ultimate impact of it. So that'll be a task for us in the future. And of course, we'll be continuing in public works with street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, again, to ensure that we're not getting pollutants into our catch basin, to, eliminate it to the greatest extent practicable. And lastly, we'll be working with neighboring towns where we have interconnected MS4s to reduce pollution in those interconnected waterways. So Bruce Brook is a good example. It's a border essentially between our town and Bridgeport, and it's one of our most heavily impaired watercourses. So it's really important that we work with the city of Bridgeport to not only mitigate from our side, but find out where exactly the pollution's coming from on their end, so we can work on mitigating it both together where necessary, and also to be able to tell the state, hey, this portion of the watercourse is impaired. It's impaired with fecal coliform, for example, but it's coming from Bridgeport. Please don't fine us. Something like that. But no, it's important to be able to track it down and know where it's coming from, and that's going to involve us working with both Bridgeport and at the north end of Stratford with Shelton, working along the Farm Mill River as necessary. And there's also multiple monitoring requirements involved in this MS4 permit. So the permit requires outfall monitoring town-wide. At some point, every one of our outfalls is supposed to be monitored for nitrogen, phosphorus, E. coli, total coliform, fecal coliform, enterococci, and I believe turbidity, and there's some other parameters as well. And if they exceed specific thresholds, we have to find out where the contamination is coming from, if we can, doing a track down, and then we have to monitor it afterwards to ensure that we've caught the problem, we're abating it, and we're working on getting those
Tina,
numbers down.
may I interrupt you for 1 second? I know that the WPCA used to do all of that for the most part. I assume now that the town is taking over that responsibility or leading that effort now that essentially our storm sewers are not connected to our waste sewers. Is that correct? Am I thinking that?
To be perfectly honest, the amount of monitoring that's required is too much even for the town to
even
take
for the
on.
town.
So we're going to have an outside consultant, and we're going to start off by doing monitoring of our most heavily impaired watercourses, like the Bruce Brook, Fairy Creek, and there's actually portions of Cemetery Brook coming into Roosevelt Forest from Shelton that are a little highly impaired with bacteria, so that might be another spot. Brewster Pond, anywhere else it's big. But those I think are the big ones. So
that's my question. I live near Worcester Pond, so that I'm always wondering about the interconnection between that and Bruce Brook, and how much can we help the situation between those two, where there's flooding all the time?
We actually already have a track down taking place. We're working with Harbor Watch in Westport, and they've been doing some monitoring of bacterial levels pretty much all the way through
in Bruce and Worcester?
Yeah,
really?
They went up as far as, is it Old Spring Road that's right there? Is that the name of it? That cuts across right before you get to Connors?
Yep, it's Old Spring.
I think it's Old Spring. And so they've done measurements, I know, as
That's the brook coming down from
correct, and that
from
all
above
connects to
Connors.
Bruce Brook.
Okay.
So they've been working on a track down of that already. So it's just a matter of finding, where it's coming from.
I am so pleased to hear this, though.
So it's moving forward. The scary thing about this permit, though, is it actually does mandate you to measure every one of these outfalls, which is nearly impossible. That's why we're working with our consultant to really prioritize. I think as long as the state sees that we have a decent plan of action in place and that we're following it and trying to hit the most heavily polluted places first, I think they'll be satisfied. So that's our monitoring requirements. Do you want to talk a little bit, John, about how the planning commission will ultimately be involved, this section?
Well, we're kind of brainstorming about what the commission could do, and one of your functions is subdivision approvals. So when we have a new development, there's going to be new roads, new impervious surfaces, new houses, new driveways, that we review, when we're reviewing the plans, that we're looking to get the impervious cover kept to a minimum. We are required, as Tina alluded to, is the directly connected impervious areas. That over time we reduce the amount of that we have throughout town. So it's not, we have town parking lots, that's where we kind of focus on, but every new development's going to have impervious surface. So if we keep allowing an increase, we also have to be having a net decrease somehow. So in a subdivision, we can look to have those impervious areas not directly connected into the system. So we could have detention basins. We require them anyway, but the regulations will change somewhat so that we're not only controlling the quantity of stormwater, but the quality of stormwater. And then in a general way, from the plan of development, bigger picture over time, looking to regulate.
Any questions?
I have tons of questions because I find this absolutely critical to our well-being. I think it's a small little thing that really does have real impact all over the place. We work, I think, fairly well with Jay Habansky when this started coming up in July of last year, I think, whenever it was, in thinking about how it affects planning, how we need to look at plans that come in terms of imperviability and those kind of issues, and keeping water on site. I know that working with Complete Streets, we talked a lot about all of the new methods that are coming up that we could incorporate into this. One of my questions for kind of pursuing you guys coming is, I'm unclear, and I've read the documents on state and also on our side. I'm unclear of how aggressive we are required to be. There was talk at some point when I read about this 2 years ago that there will be penalties eventually, that this is essentially the breaking in period, where eventually they will start coming down on us if we can't show nitrogen reductions, because in many ways we've eliminated nitrogen out of our sewer. Now the only place it's flowing right into the sound is through our wastewater systems. So I guess that's the question that I have is, how tough should we be with people coming in, offering them solutions that are not necessarily the first thing that they would take off the shelf? Because I think that's critical to our future. The less water we're putting into our system, the better off we'll be, and ultimately, so will they be. They'll have closer to a green building, which is what we want to be encouraging, particularly as a planning department, as a planning committee.
And I think if you really want teeth behind that, you're going to have to get the zoning regulations to establish some sort of rules that developers have to be considering use of LID. They have to have somewhere in their application an alternatives analysis. This is what it'll be like if I use a green roof. This is what it'll look like if I use a bioswale. If I use pervious pavers, I've reduced my amount of stormwater runoff from the site by X. Like, they need to start providing you with that data. If it's gonna work in the way you're envisioning it, it's got to be written as a regulation. And unfortunately, I don't know if that. It can happen at the municipal level, but unless it's mandated by the state first, it might be more difficult. I'm not sure really right now what other towns have been doing to jump ahead to that and to get those regulations in their books.
I see it in New Haven, I see it in other places, but I don't necessarily know if there's regulations behind that, or if those are all pilot projects.
So there's a couple points to make. We just passed the illicit discharge elimination ordinance. The next ordinance that is required to be passed in here is a post-construction ordinance, which post-construction is to try to do things now so that when we're done with construction, we're not causing a problem. So that's where that low impact development
And
regulations are gonna
I
start to
think
come in.
Stratford does a bang-up job on construction mandates. I think we really do. When I see any of the plans that come through, they seem to be thorough and well-designed and everything else. I think what you've identified is the post-construction, when what is left there for the next decades
Right.
that we need to keep focusing on.
So there will be an ordinance up for consideration in this coming year.
Well, let us help you in any way that we can if you guys are going to start putting that together. And I would honestly think if there's anything that planning can do, let's meet again or bring us stuff that we can respond to. I'm speaking for the whole planning, but I'm speaking as myself, really.
Harold usually does. If you do write an ordinance, is that something that you could share maybe through Sesmitha, through to the Planning Commission, that we can then write a letter of support for that ordinance?
I think it would have to be.
Yeah, sure.
If I may add, we did discuss this, and John did mention previously that there is a model ordinance on stormwater regulations that will be released later this year by the state, and we'd like to take that model ordinance and, tailor it down to Stratford's needs and present it before the commission. And knowing from New Haven experience, New Haven has green stormwater regulations too. And probably I would look into what was there and what's in the model ordinance, what is required in Stratford, and then come up with something that suits the needs of Stratford.
Well, I think we are so far ahead in so many areas that if we can add this to the list, we make ourselves a much more attractive community. So I truly appreciate both of you coming tonight. I really mean it. I kind of pestered everybody to help get you here. So, because I take this very seriously and I put a lot of attention on it with anything that comes through, I wanted to make sure I wasn't being overly pinpoint in terms of interest in this and pointing this out to people who bring things in. I think you've answered a lot of my questions. I did have one other thing. You talked about public outreach. I have been spending once a week in Boston, much more than I want to, but they have a phenomenal thing, which we have something similar. Every storm drain that's there tells you where the water's going, not just into the sound. It says this exits at here. So I think in terms of building community responses, that's probably the same here. In District 6, where I am, you could probably label them that they're all coming out somewhere in the Housatonic, and a certain portion is coming down into Stratford and going out. But we could pretty easily identify in my area. I know that the Worcester School was doing projects this year on pollution control things. Would this be something that we could actually push through the schools that have them adopt?
Absolutely.
Draining, our
And
drains?
This is something we've considered, and we actually have a member of our Conservation Commission who runs trips for I'm pretty sure it's every fourth grader in the town to go to Long Beach, and they do a whole kind of comprehensive lesson on what the marsh is, what animals are found there, and why it's so important that we maintain our watercourses, and why we don't pollute our watercourses, because it all ends up here. So that is step one, and I think we could definitely do a better job of it.
Well, I know they don't give you money to do any of this.
That's part of the problem.
That
And
is
to
the
be
problem.
honest, I've reached out to the schools before, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, because a lot of the teachers are actually kind of handling a lot of this stuff internally already. So it'd be nice if we can have a more defined program, if you will, where they have one lesson plan a year at least that they maybe promote to their students. And getting back to what you were talking about, having the catch basins labeled, there have been 2 Eagle Scouts that have gone around actually placing placards.
I've seen
on
that
some
in
catch
Lordship.
basins.
Yes.
Yep, in Lordship and also in the Brewster Pond, Longbrook area. So I think we have a total of about 500 catch basins that have been marked thus far. it would be nice to get all of them, so, you know, anytime I have another Eagle Scout come through, I could certainly make that suggestion.
The other, what was it? I could ask you a million questions, and I'll try not to. The other thing, I've been speaking with Joe Gresco about Bruce Creek and cleanup over there. I don't even think we know yet whether citizens can actually walk into that creek bed, that it might be so polluted, which is really a terrible statement. But it tells us where a lot of the bacteria that's coming into the lower part of the sound in that area is coming from. I'm interested in getting connection of my neighbors in District 6 by Worcester to understand that Worcester Creek, or whatever the creeks are there, are connecting into that area. The water we're sending is going over there. Building some kind of community-wide understanding of how the waterways in our town are connected, even if you don't see the actual connection. I mean, we can go straight up to Hawley Lane.
Yep.
With all those water bodies. If someone makes a mess there, it's coming straight down. And I think in terms of educating the public,
We actually had probably either, I think it was about 2 years ago, we had an article that I wrote, Swimming in Stormwater, and we put it out to the Stratford Star, and it talked about just that, how all our water courses are connected and they all lead to the sound, and why it's so important to, you know, stop pollution where it starts. And we launched that on the town website. It would be easy enough to just relaunch it again. And then also, I mean, if you guys have any idea for, if you want a community-wide meeting, perhaps, I'm sure we could pull that together for sure. And I could even have some,
I can deliver 2
representatives from
good
our-
planning people, for sure, right?
And
We could,
we would have more than enough resources to pull something like that together. It's just a matter of interest.
I do have a question. Are the two of you the contact people or the people executing this checklist, or is there a committee of the departments?
We're a committee. John kind of headed us up. Sorry, John. And then me, Jay Hibansky, and now Sue Smith has joined us.
So there is,
Oh, and Tommy from Highways Department and Public Works.
okay, so,
So we try to meet quarterly,
mhm.
make sure we're on track for meeting all the terms of the permit. And right now, we're actually in the process of our annual reporting from 2018. So we're putting all of that together for submittal to DEEP.
And just to comment on that, we will advertise that for public comment, so every annual report gets posted on the website, gets a copy at the library and town clerk. So it's an activity report of what we've done the previous year to meet our goals. And so you'll see that on the town website as well.
And at the end of the permit, 2022, what happens next?
Usually, oh, go ahead.
Well, last time, this permit's been going on since 2004, so last time it was supposed to expire in 2009, and they never reissued it, they just kept rolling it. So it rolled till 2017. So I'm not sure what'll happen in 2022, if it's gonna roll again, or be reissued. But to somebody's point, the first time was not as restrictive as the current permit. The current permit has more, you shall do this, you shall do that, and so they are tightening up what they're mandating us to do. It's not as so much a feeler this time around, it's more, we want you to accomplish some goals.
I know this from reading about sewer systems when the whole sewer issue was coming around. We are not in the same situation because we separated our wastewater systems, so our stormwater systems from our wastewater systems. But in most of the state, that's where they're penalizing towns through their wastewater system. So I think we're a little safer because they're not connected. But I do know that our pilot monies in that for the WPCA include some of this storm outlet stuff. So I would assume at some point there will be a dollar amount that'll be tied to all of this if we show that we're not lowering our nitrogen levels.
Well, no, I mean, because we are separate, the nitrogen credits we get, is that where you're at?
Yeah.
The nitrogen credits we get from the WPCA are only for our sanitary sewer discharge.
Only because our system is separated.
Right.
In other cities where they're not separated, they're joined together. So their activity of doing stormwater cleanup is tied to their wastewater systems. We're a little bit easier, which might give us more leeway because they're not connected. But yet, I guess Public Works still performs the same duties that have always been performed by Public Works. I don't know. I keep reading up because it seems like one thing we can do something about. I thank you both. If I can do anything, let me know.
Another question, you mentioned Shelton, you mentioned Bridgeport. Is there, and you've talked about working with them, but are there any plans, actual plans to meet with Bridgeport and Shelton and, meet with them quarterly to come up with kind of a regional plan that possibly the state might be more interested in helping with because it's a regional plan as opposed to one municipality?
Well, I'm not so worried about Shelton right now just because the water quality of Far Mill River it's not a highly impaired water course. It's really Bruce Brook. And we've been working with the city of Bridgeport through Joe Gresco to try and implement a cleanup, and it's been ongoing now for about a year and a half or so. And again, Harbor Watch is involved in that, as well as the soundkeeper, Bill Lisi.
Yep.
And so we've been trying to establish that coordination. It's been difficult just because it's hard to get the resources to actually get into Bruce Brook and clean it out because it's far more than just high levels of bacteria. There's actual huge pieces of litter and trash that are in there, like bags and bags. So it's going to take a real effort to even get started in there. But I do hope that over the course of this next year, under the permit, we can work with Bridgeport more closely to try and reach a solution to getting some of the stuff out of that water course.
It's beneficial to them, to us, and to the state.
Absolutely.
So if they're, it might, working with Joe Gresco, maybe the state could work on some funding or grant that would cover some of these large expenses.
And I actually just found out, it was before the holidays, Harbor Watch did receive a pretty substantial grant. I think it was almost $10,000 to look at Bruce Brook water course.
Oh, good.
It was part of it.
Would there be any coastal resiliency monies for something like this? Because I know that that's one of the things that came up as a bright red star when we were working on coastal resiliency. That was one area that everyone said is going to have to be dealt with because essentially there is no flow there, and it's so damaged.
And I'm sure there is. That would probably be a question for our grant writer. Excuse me, our grant
Maybe
writer.
that's something that Jay could look into. I did think of another question. When people come in with projects, I'm talking about the developers and the builders, how are they getting this information? Is this information being disseminated through the engineers who are essentially telling them? So all of our local engineers in Connecticut are well aware of this in terms of their specs on their plans and all of that?
Yeah, currently, that's how it's going. When we're getting plan submissions, we're reviewing, we're commenting that you have to comply with the MS4 regulations.
So you're making the initial comments, though. I guess what I'm saying is, since July 2017, have you seen an improvement in their understanding of this? Or is there still a big lag time with developers?
Well, we've always been pretty good on having certain requirements, so they kind of know what we're expecting. I would say, for the most part, the engineers know general what we want. We're all kind of learning some of the specifics of the permit requirements, and then when the ordinance goes in place, they'll be mandated. So right now, it's just we comment, and we don't have a whole lot of teeth to require.
To require, okay.
And that essentially is a problem. Even when somebody comes in for an application for inland wetlands, I can't force them to look at LID. It's unfortunate, but I can't. I could suggest it and hope
Well,
that.
you can, and then the lawyers will be here,
I
that's
can
well.
suggest it, and there's so many resources now that UConn has online through
Yes.
their UConn Nemo. They
Yes.
tell you how to build a rain garden. It's not that difficult.
Right.
And so there's small things like that
ha-
applicants.
So is
start looking
is
at.
the state leaving it into the hands of the local town? So the state
Correct.
doesn't want to necessarily do anything like a building code. So, you know, there's building codes and they change constantly for developers, right? So the state doesn't want to mandate anything. They want to push it down to the local level, and you basically are,
Well, the way this is working, it's actually a permit. So the
Okay.
town is the permit holder, and everybody else in the town is working under our general permit. And that makes us, as the permit holder, responsible for making sure they're complying, because we're the ones that get fined
if they
something
don't
bad.
comply.
When you say everybody, that includes the developers and the engineers. Have we ever considered, or after we get, after we get our ordinance, have we ever considered doing a open house day for all the developers and builders to come in and discuss this and say, these are what we're looking for? Make your project more attractive to us by putting these things in there initially, and you might find it easier. I think that would be a great carrot to hold out there.
I think that's a great idea.
I mean, do you know what I mean? I would look more favorably on someone coming in saying, I'm putting a rain garden in here,
Yep.
than saying, I'm gonna fill your storm drains with.
And I think part of the problem is people kind of just fear it at this point because it's new. They've never really used this kind of infrastructure before. They don't want to put it in, have it fail, and then have to go back and redo everything, which I understand. So it is a matter of getting them educated properly in how to properly use this LID.
You're right, because I assume these are gonna fail. We don't know how long some of these, I was looking at a recent plan that we have before us, and I thought, who's gonna know? This is 4 feet underground. If this is nearing failure, or if it's even functioning. We're not gonna know until it starts flooding. And there is no maintenance schedule on this. I would assume town's not gonna be maintaining these
No,
pieces.
that's for that post-construction.
Yeah, it's really important to have.
Yeah,
this in
it's really, it's an issue that we need to make sure, but it's happening all over the country. So someone must be doing this and have thought about some of these things.
If I may add, we are a CRS community, so eventually, like, we would be adopting the program for public information, I suppose. And John was part of the discussions, Tina, but I haven't informed everybody in the town hall yet, but what we're trying to do is roll out a public education component through the CRS PPI so that, we can phase out these outreach projects and materials. Like 1 month, we just focus on flooding. 1 month, we only focus on stormwater ordinances. And, keep feeding people with information so that we educate them. So that could be integrated into the CRS. And regarding your question about grants for coastal resiliency, we are always on the lookout for grants. And there was something that was recently announced for pre-disaster mitigation assistance, but there was another priority, so we are going after that priority. But having said that, it doesn't mean that we are not looking out for the other projects as much. It's just a matter of, which ones we can avail for what and how can we combine.
Any other questions from anyone? Would you like to make any other comment, or?
Just thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for coming and giving us a lot of good information, and if we can assist in any way with any of your plans, either from the ordinance and supporting it to supporting an activity or a day where we bring in developers to help educate them. I know Health Department does that all the time with the different salons and the, different groups, and I think it helps them a lot. It avoids problems as opposed to having to go back and say, you can't do that. So if we can help in any way, please come back and let Sasmitha know, and she'll let us know. Okay? Again, thank you for taking the time to come out this evening. We appreciate that. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very good. Okay, moving right along. The next thing on our agenda is approval of minutes. And last month, Sasmitha was so kind to fill in for Gail, who we're glad to see back and feeling hopefully better. So if I could have a motion to accept the minutes? Mr. Vigliotti, second? Mr. Watson? Any discussion? Otherwise, all in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, and that's unanimously approved. Okay, now we're going to the zoning referrals for the text amendment. 7.1.3.2, an informal review?
We just realized that the ordinance for CA, commercial retail uses, does not specify explicitly within the ordinance that office and medical uses are permitted uses in the CA zone. This is just an informal, heads up. Eventually, our office will bring about a zoning ordinance amendment and would request your support to pass it through the zoning commission. Just to, if you have any comments on that, let me know. Otherwise, it's just a simple, adding two words that office and medical uses are permitted uses.
And that's consistent with the POCD?
Yes, it is consistent with the POCD.
Mr. Watson?
And I think we didn't realize that either, because I've known we've had discussions where we've talked about combining all those three, assuming that it was already in there. So thank you.
So that's all we need to do?
That's all.
Okay. Now,
Rogales, yes. You may want to hand it over to me.
yeah, I'm going to, well, I can, either you or to Jim. Either,
Okay. Yeah, you can hand it over to Jim.
if you want to take over, Jim, because we're looking at text amendment, the petition of the Rogales LLC seeking a zone change from RS-1 to the proposed Orinoco Village District, and I am recusing myself from that referral. So it's all yours.
Okay, so under zoning referrals, text amendment petition of Rogales LLC seeking a zone change from RS1 to the proposed Orinoco Village District.
Give a heads up on this.
Yeah, would you?
Okay. So there is a public hearing item scheduled for this application tomorrow at the zoning commission, and basically the applicant is requesting a zone change for the property at 170 Orinoco and 1180 James Farm. They're proposing to subdivide, not subdivide actually, they're proposing to develop, combine the portion of lot from 1180, actually combine all of 1180, and then keep portion of 170 open, 170 Orinoco, and it will consist of 25 affordable housing homes per Section 8-30G state statute. The text of the ordinance has been provided to you. Yes,
May I ask one question? You said will consist of 25
units.
25 homes total, but
Yes.
there are only 6, 7 or 8 that are affordable.
I thought when the application came in before us to decide, it said all are affordable. But now, I don't know, once it has been moved out of Planning Commission's authority, and now it's going to Zoning Commission, I'm not sure if they changed the application. But I still think that they're looking at 25.
They are looking, from what I've been reading, they're looking at 25, but my understanding was that it was only 8 of those or 9 of those units would be affordable.
Okay, I don't know about that. But right now, what we're looking at is at the zone change for that, the existing zone for those properties is RS1, residential single family, large lot zoning, and now the proposed ordinance is proposing a high density and different parking requirements. So the staff, Jay Hibansky in our office, has written a staff report on this 2 months ago, I think before I started, or maybe right when I started. And he identified several sections of POCD and identified the consistency with POCD for the proposed text amendment. Just to note, the town needs affordable housing, and affordability is a crisis, not just in the town, but the entire state. So while it is a good, well-intentioned project, like you can see in his staff report, he mentions that the project appears to be substantially inconsistent with the POCD. And I leave it to you to decide what you would want to do with the zone change.
You're our chair? I'm sorry. I have a question about this whole property, because if someone could correct me, I would appreciate it, or help me remember. I believe that we looked at this same property with 7 housing units on the opposite end, which right now is being saved as wetlands. I believe we were looking at 7 or 9 houses on that end of the property only a few months ago. And this end, the other opposite end of the property, had driveways that went to this end of the property, but did not include what we're looking at right now. So I'm confused. Is that other area still a live proposal? Or if we grant permission on this piece, are we talking about not 25, but 36 units, or something of that sort?
It is unclear. If you look at the staff report, page 3, under site plan review, that Mr. Hibansky wrote, it says, the commission may choose to inquire what are the intended plans for the new lot of 170 Ornock Lane that has been reduced and shows no development on these plans. The commission should be aware that the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission has recently denied an application for 7 units on this not yet created site.
Okay.
Is the intent to merge these 2 projects in the future? So we are not sure about that.
So this new proposal is a result of Inland Water saying no to development
Yes.
on that wetlands property. So they've now ruled that whole property as wetlands. Okay. So this is the comeback
Yes.
in terms of making it work. Okay. So my assumption is because of the ruling of inland wetlands, that's not buildable property. I mean, I would assume that they would have to go to court to get that ruling overturned in order for that other proposal to go forward in any kind of way. Does that sound correct? Yes. Okay, thank you. May I make another comment?
Yes.
I appreciate that we make so many of our judgments based on the POCD. We tend to follow very closely what the POCD, because it really is a plan of where we want to go in the future. I think that, I don't agree with everything in there, but I agree that in general, the movement that the POCD I take very seriously when I look at projects and I see that they're inconsistent with our POCD, because that's the only thing we have to say, this is the kind of community that we want. So I think that we should give real weight to that. When I see inconsistent statements, I think those have heavy, heavy meaning and heavy weight. And I always play a little game with myself that I try to look through all the plans and understand all the documentation before I look at any of the planning department appraisals of what they see in it, to see how we measure up in terms of our thinking. And in this sense, I think I'm pretty consistent with what I see here. I think that we are looking at a property that's overly dense for what's there. I think that I would not want to be a neighbor next to some of these properties. I would feel differently if we were talking about 15 projects, because it would be, I also know that we've talked about changing building setbacks and all of that. I looked at the site plan, and these are like shoehorned in, like Levittown, into a tiny little lot that my first reaction is take all these houses and put them together into threes. Then you'd have twice the amount of land that would be available as open land. You would reduce so much of what's jammed in there and reduce the number that's there. But I also look at the amount of sewer that's going in, the amount of all of that they're putting in there, and who knows what their numbers are for this to be a profitable development. But it comes back to, profitable or not, does it fit with our vision of the town? And that's what I always come back to in looking at this. I think that we're still forcing houses right up to the lot line of the wetlands area, the conservation zone. Literally right, the back door, you step out the back door and you're in the conservation zone. That to me can't be right. We can't let that pass. That in and of itself is something that can't be right. It's a conservation zone. You can't have a door there if you're stepping onto a conservation zone. So there are things that I think push this plan that I see beyond the limits of what I feel I should say yes to. I can go through some of the others, but I really feel that this is inconsistent with our POCD.
And I agree with Harold, totally on this. The character of the area would be severely affected. And if you look at the houses that are in front of this project, I believe there's 3 houses that, if that was my property, I would be up in arms right now with 25 units going in behind my house. And I looked at the property. It is just crunched. And, the access to get in, the access to get out, it really doesn't make any sense. And to feed the affordable housing piece in there to try to make it work, I think is, it's not really, as Harold stated, the inconsistencies far outweigh the consistencies here. And again, the character of the neighborhood would just be altered, and I think we'd have a severe issue with the neighbors. I really do. And it doesn't, as Harold said, the POCD just doesn't conform to that. And I think they've tried every single arena to get these approvals done, and they're just waiting for one loophole, or they're waiting for the right commission to make a positive recommendation on this. And I just don't think it's the right thing to do right now. How many years has this been going on now? Think about it.
I saw something in here that went back to 2003, but
Yeah.
I don't know if that's all the same development here.
Well, it's part and parcel of all the same stuff. So.
I have a question. Is this is the same property, though, that we got the amendment last week concerning the Supreme Court and the subdivision, right?
Yes.
How does that impact, or, you know, how does that affect, like, what we're voting on here?
Yes, so by statute and by Stratford Town Code, the authority vested in the Planning Commission here is to actually review the subdivision applications and recommend long-range planning initiatives and probably some zone change initiatives, offer advice on zone changes. In this case, what happened is that the applicant applied for a subdivision in September, and then it was changed again to November. Like the plans were altered or something, I don't remember. I was not even here at that time. And after that, in December, a court case was, officially disclosed. The ruling of the court case said that a subdivision, it's a Supreme Court case, by the way, and it said that a subdivision clearly means dividing a lot into 3 or more parcels. And the way we look at this application, there were 2 lots before, and after the proposed development, there will still be 2 lots. Because previously it would be 170 Ornock and 1180 James Farm, but now it'll be 170 Ornock combined with 1180 James Farm, like a portion of it, and then the remaining is another parcel 2 of 170 Ornock. So we don't see 3 lots being created. So we had to tell the applicant that now this doesn't fall under the purview of Planning Commission, and they're directly going to the Zoning Commission. However, because the Planning Commission has been vested the authority to review zone changes, and the applicant needs a zone change because he's proposing high-density development in a largely single-family zone. That's why it's come back to the Planning Commission, just the zone change part of it, the text amendment. Now, we should also be mindful that our section 5.3 on residence apartments no longer can be implemented because we reached a maximum cap to build 8 or more housing units in the town, in any development. So with that being gone, with no other alternative for high-density developments at this point, other than the TOD near the town center, the only tool that they could avail is a zone change for this type of development. Now, based on the staff report that I've seen from Jay Hibansky, I can clearly see that there's a lot of inconsistencies with POCD, like you mentioned, and except for the affordable housing component, where the POCD advocates for more affordable housing, and the town does need a lot of affordable housing, to be fair. But this can be also viewed as spot zoning because it's not generally consistent with the comprehensive plan for the most part of it. So it's now for you to decide what you would recommend to the Zoning Commission, whether you would recommend them to go ahead with the zone change, or you would ask them to ask the applicant to reconsider alternatives.
Do we have more discussion, or are we ready to make a motion?
Are we able to make this with 3 people?
Yes,
That's-
we need 3 votes.
Well, I can move that we deny the text change if that's, I don't know what the document is called for the text change. Zoning? The text change for, what's it called, OVD? From RS1 district to the proposed OVD designation, that we deny that as too intense a use and not falling within our POCD, not being consistent with our POCD.
So we have a motion to deny.
Is that good enough?
the text amendment.
I'll second it, and we've got discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so some discussion, because you did, the last thing you just threw out was we can go back to the developer and see if they're willing to make changes. Is that an option, or?
We cannot.
We cannot, oh.
But we can suggest that, in our findings, that maybe the developer should look at alternative options, like I would say TOD. I don't know.
Gotcha, okay. All right.
All right, so we have a motion to deny, and it's seconded by Mr. Semp. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Nobody opposed. Motion passes unanimously. I'd like to hand the control of the meeting back over to Pat, our chairman.
Thank you. Good job, Jim. Okay, the next is, well, there's no CAM site plan reviews, correct? Yes. Okay, and there's no 824 reviews. Any discussion of the town plan of conservation and development? Okay. All right, our favorite subject. Discussion of section 5.3 of the zoning regulations. And I believe in our packet, we have a map that was well done by our town planner with the addition of Deerfield Woods. Were there any other changes from last month?
No, I noticed that Deerfield Woods was also built before 1984. So we were tracking all equivalents or bedrooms since 1983 when section 5.3 was established.
Okay.
So the numbers didn't change because of that. We still are at the cap of 900 equivalents approximately.
So therefore, we're actually above the 9.
We are almost 300 equivalents above the 604.5 that is allowed by section 5.3.
Okay. Mr. Watson?
In all my time doing anything with planning, it's been totally obvious that this is a non-functioning ordinance. It's not, I mean, no one can deny it. I think what we need to discuss is what can we replace it with. I don't think there's any saving this ordinance. It doesn't seem to me that there is no equitable way. If you take this map even, it's neighborhoods that existed in 1960. Pat's gonna throw a spoon at me or something, but these were neighborhood schools that existed when the ordinance was written. Those neighborhood schools don't exist in some places anymore. So at best, what we could do is take this and overlay our current planning districts on it and say, let's see how our districts rate in terms of that. I think that would be interesting to see. But I also would be very interested to see is there's a profile of people who live in dense housing. And it's not the same as single-family residence. And I spent half my time living in a co-op, so in New York, so I'm not making a value judgment on either one of them. But in terms of us understanding where these are spread out through the town, because I think that's one of the things we need to look at. The piece that we just did would be a different discussion if we had some sense of how we can equally spread these out. The only neighborhood that is committed to having huge amounts is the Todd district. But are we going to say everything's going to be built in Todd? Because that's currently what our POCD basically is saying. If you have a building to build, an apartment building, build it in Todd. Well, there's not even enough space in Todd to put the 5,000 that MetroCog says we're going to add in apartment housing people. That's what they're saying will add in the next 10 years in multifamily housing. That's a lot. If you put that many people in the historic district, in that area, it's going to end up looking a lot like some other town. It will never look like Stratford. So I think we really have to be realistic. We have to say that can't all go in the Todd area. It needs to go into every single neighborhood. But we also need to know realistically, because that's going to change everything. That's going to change our schools. It's going to change our voting patterns. It's going to change how many people are committed to Stratford, because people that live in apartments are not as committed to the town as a single property owner. They're not directly paying the taxes for the most part, unless it's a co-op, but even then they're not sometimes paying the taxes. Versus a homeowner who is paying the taxes, it's a very personal thing that they can actually fight about. So we need to, I think we need to take this list, and it's not the units, but overlay our planning districts on it, then go back and let's say, how many people are living in multifamily housing in this district? Forget any totals, but let's see how many multifamily housing people we already have living there. Then let's come up with some kind of a new number saying, well, this district has no one living, or only has 500, 600 people living in multifamily housing, whereas this district already has 3,500. Then we can start to say, okay, how much does a multifamily housing, what kind of strain does it put on our school district? Because you could guess they're either going to be seniors, or they're going to be young families, or they're going to be millennials. If we end up with housing that attracts young families, then we do have to think about our schools. If we're trying to push our schools back to having local community schools, it makes a difference where we build housing. So I think that it's fraught, because no matter what happens, we're going to sit here and we're going to have to take the politics of saying, how much can my district take? In my district, I look at it and say, if anybody wants to put multifamily housing in my district, they're going to have to tear down housing, because there is no buildable property. There is no missing piece that's been abandoned. There is no orphaned property in my district, for the most part, that is not already floodplain or is not already built with housing. There are a few orphaned lots from the 40s where someone built a house and the lot next to it, but that's a handful. That's maybe 4 or 5 in both districts. So each of these districts are going to have a different kind of reasoning for what we can do in them. Your district is going to be harder. We're going to have to say, are we going to build in a flood zone? We might have built there before, but will we do that now, looking at the future? So I think that it would give us a better way for us to think about it, and each of us to think about how we see our districts. Maybe we could set goals for saying, how could we come up with a number that's a maximum? And then how will that affect us in that district? Can we lower that back to come up with another number so that we could actually come up with something more sensible? I don't think that we would want any publicity on this until we actually did some thinking about it. I'm serious.
You think, I agree.
But do you understand what I'm saying? That we could have some discussions and see, can we come up with something rational? Otherwise, we're going to be we will be discussing this until I'm off the board and someone else has come on.
So I think the biggest issue that we have is we're pretty much landlocked. We are. If you look throughout the districts, I mean, realistically, you're completely landlocked in this town. Like you said, how many houses can you knock down to put up multifamily units? I think if there's any opportunity besides the TOD, might be down in the AFCO site, or down by the beach areas, down there, and developing that property into multifamily use as well as retail, and which is a little farther away, but from the TOD. But that to me would be.
Well, that is part of the POCD right now.
Yeah.
Expecting that.
Yeah.
I just want to add that we're right now in the process of applying for a CDBG grant to study affordable housing in the town. the last times any such thing was even attempted was in 2003. And based on the old files that I've seen, and I think we're long overdue because the market's changing, the demographic is changing, and the preferences of population are also changing. But to be realistic, that whole process of applying for the grant and maybe obtaining the grant, and if we did get the grant approval and actually starting a study would not happen anytime before August this year, I think, or even later. So until then, if you would like to, keep section 5.3, like you can still keep it, but staff cannot do anything with that because we reached the cap. If you want to redirect any multifamily towards TOD for the time being, till we actually get the affordable housing study kickstarted, that's an option that you have. Or if you want to look at alternatives for zoning, for encouraging multifamily, that's another option that you could consider. But I would, as a planner, I would suggest wait till the study is completed before you actually jump into zoning, because the study would probably reveal what other towns are doing and how people are able to afford housing in the town, what are they looking for on the market, are there enough rental, are there enough ownership, what kind of homes are people looking for, where are they mostly looking for, and then maybe come up with an ordinance or regulation based on that. So you have 3 options, and you could pick any one of those options. And if you decide to actually keep section 5.3 as it is for now, it doesn't change the way we are doing business right now. But if you think, let's be progressive, and because there is a TOD zone, but there's nothing robustly happening at the moment, and if you decide, okay, in the next few months it's not a bad idea to actually redirect developers to look into TOD as a valuable tool for encouraging multifamily development, that's a good enough option, because you need some density for TOD to occur. And
Okay.
Well,
I have a, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Okay.
The POCD essentially already is redirecting us to the TOD. It's saying that's where the focus should be in terms of building a walkable community.
yes.
So what we have to do is, if we're really paying attention to that, is when we get these other projects, we have to remind them that they're not bikeable, they're not walkable. There is no, we bring up these same issues again and again and again. I like that you mentioned senior housing, because that might be something that we could say all 5 of these districts needs to have a senior housing area. And that would be easier to sell in the community, in every community, saying, what's yours going to be? Are we going to take 5 houses on a street and make them all 2-family homes so that one can be for a senior, the other can be for a young couple? There are ways that we could develop senior housing here that would be functional for each of these different kind of districts.
And Stratford does have one of the largest senior population, and there seems to be a trend that seniors are downsizing. They don't necessarily want to leave Stratford, but they don't want their large home that, where they raised a few kids, but they'd like to go into an apartment or a small condo that they can afford, and they know the exact costs and everything, fees. It does behoove us to really take a serious look at that. As far as the TOD, and that is where we're pushing, but I have some concerns on the density of the TOD, as do the public. We certainly have heard that from the public, so we do have to be careful. It also is adjacent to our historic district, so they're going to have some questions and issues regarding the density. I don't know about you, but it took me 15 minutes to get here today. To get through the center of Stratford. And until that issue is resolved, adding to the TOD, we have to be careful where within the TOD. You know, if we look at Ferry Boulevard, even there you still have traffic concerns. And you're gonna have exit 33 interchange go in, and how is that going to affect it? So it's a matter of timing. We may not be able to add to the TOD until after August. To your point of waiting till, if we got the CDBG grant. Yeah, it is one of those tough issues that it's a no-win.
But-
Yeah.
So Smith, was my suggestion about doing the overlay on this and trying to come up with a total for each of these planning districts, does that make any sense?
Yes, I'm going to work on it for the next meeting. I'm going to overlay the planning
Okay.
district boundaries and bring you.
And I don't know if you can go back to these apartments to see how many units, I guess ideally it would be how many bedrooms are there total in
Sure.
each of those planning districts.
I think we have a report on that.
Do we?
Yeah, I think, didn't you give us that a couple?
I gave you a report based on neighborhood boundaries, and he wants me to look at planning districts. So I'm going to put
Okay.
planning districts on this and show you how many in each district.
Okay.
The reason I say that is that ultimately, if we pass something, I assume it's going to go to town council, right? They're going to have to vote yea or nay on this. So
Yeah, probably.
it's going to either pass or fail, depending on what we present to those districts.
Mhm.
So I would rather, with that in mind, plan something that we have some probability of
Success.
success in.
Is it also possible to, I don't know if you can get this through the real estate people, to find out what the, not the capacity, but the number of people who are in these apartments?
Sure. I am writing that as part of the scope for affordable housing grant. So if you do get the grant, we'll hire a consultant. We'll have them do some stakeholder or developer meetings and figure out, based on actual data, not just on census data, how many people walk, bike from these existing developments, how many people live there.
That would be good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just make one comment. You know, the problem is our traffic is horrendous, but our public transportation is non-existent. So I laugh when somebody says they want to put something in the north end of town and there's no transportation there. Well, there's no transportation anywhere in the town of Stratford, quite frankly. I think District 2 has 2 buses, and they keep cutting that back. But that's it. So it's difficult to say that there's transportation anywhere. And then you talk about bike lanes, and really I wouldn't take a bike through downtown Stratford to get to the train station. I'm sure Mr. Watson has.
I have many times, but you're right. It's dangerous, no.
So until, it's like the chicken, we have to take care of some of these issues ahead of time. I do know that there is some complete street plans.
Yes, and we are going to actually go to that item next on the agenda, I think, when I can give you an update on what is happening with complete streets.
Okay. Now, as far as some of this information coming back to us, when might you be able to do that? Like what Mr. Watson wants?
I will bring the map for the next meeting with the planning districts overlaid and analysis redirected towards planning districts.
Okay.
In the meantime, I would also, I'm applying for the grant right now online, and February 10th is the cutoff, I think. I would probably come back to the commission for a letter of support. So I can, when we are invited for a quick Q&A by the Community Development Office, I can take the letter of support with me and present it before the committee that decides whether we should get the grant or not.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, January 30th, there's a public hearing.
Yes.
and then it's due February 11th, and then I don't know if they've set the public hearing for after that.
I'm not sure. They said they would call us and
Okay.
let us know if there's a Q&A. I have to check the time frame. But January 30th, if the public hearing is happening, then, I'll take the letter of support. I might have to request you
Okay,
by email for a letter of support.
okay. I just want to make sure that
Yes.
we can do that we can meet that timetable. Okay, any other comments, questions on number 7? We'll just wait till we get more information. The more information, the better. Because this is going to be a difficult issue. Okay, number 8 is erosion and sediment control plan. There's nothing there, no bond release requests. Implementation plans, anything on that as far as the Greenway project?
I'm planning to attend the first meeting that'll be held in February this year.
February,
Yeah.
yes.
So I'm planning to attend that and introduce myself to the Greenway Committee.
Good.
That's all I can say. You have any?
Okay. Complete Streets, any update on that?
Yes, so Jay Hibansky signed a contract with BSE and MetroCog. So BSE is going to survey the area for the next few months, and there's a whole schedule of events that will happen before construction actually begins in spring 2020. So this whole year, they'll be spending time in surveying. And I actually did see their van at the town center when I went to pick up lunch. So it looks like they're working hard.
Good. Good. Any questions? Yeah.
My understanding, though, that we're a year behind, because I thought that was going to be done by 2019, has been all the discussion. Now suddenly we're jumping into 2020. Did they say when, 2020?
I think they said spring 2020, like they have to survey the whole area and then seek permits and approvals from the state, and that is a lengthy process involved before they can actually hit the ground running.
Does any of these plans come before Planning Commission? The Complete Streets?
I think when it comes to the stage, they're also doing a design on this, so when it comes to a stage where the designs are complete and almost entering into execution, I can request them to come and present before the Planning Commission too.
Can I-
That'd be good.
May I add?
Yep.
My understanding is that because this is all right-of-way for state DOT, that the majority of this, we can say anything we want, but the ultimate decision is the state.
Mhm.
So what we will have is a say in the decor, in the bench choices, in the lights, and but all the mechanicals and all of the actual layouts will be decided by the state. We don't really have a whole lot
Much
to
to
say.
say. Yeah, because I did notice in the, your planning report, or annual report, there's a section on the, where is it? On the Complete Streets Phase 1. And I noticed it still has us backing into angled, or backing out of parking in Stratford Center. And I know that's been discussed and at several of the public hearings, people were concerned about that.
Okay, the language that I put in there is based on a write-up that was existing in the files, and maybe that's not an option that they're considering right now. So I can check with the staff to see if that still holds true, or, they have change of plans there. In either case, I think it's a good idea to invite them to Planning Commission to just present their designs.
Okay. Yeah, because I have another question, that they want to move the flagpole into the center median, which is where it was before.
Okay.
So they want to move it back, and I think we found that that was dangerous. But I just happened to see that, and I was
Okay.
curious. Any other questions on complete streets?
I have some good news for you all. We did receive a preliminary rating. Stratford is Class 8 at 10% discount. So I think they will officially release the date, release the rating to the mayor, and probably there will be some public announcement happening, but just so you know, well,
It's, you say Class 8, is there a
Oh.
Class 10, or is 8 the highest?
for the CRS, right?
Yeah.
Class 10 is, like, it's an increment of from 10 to 1. 10 means 0 discount, but you're into the program.
Oh, okay, so it goes that
9
way.
means 5%, 8 means 10%, 7
We
means
got
15.
higher than was expected.
Yeah.
We got double what we expected.
Yes, I think, yes, I don't know.
Yeah, no, from what Jay had said to me a long time ago. Yeah, he thought it was gonna be 5, so we actually got double.
10.
That's good, that meant they loved us.
Excellent. That is good news.
Well-
I'm sure that people of Stratford would appreciate that.
Yes, and one thing I would like to request is if you have identified any members or volunteers for the PPI committee, please let us know, because I think we should just hit the ground running on that. It's the start of the year. We can have a calendar of events and start doing the PPI, adopt the PPI plan, and go with the implementation.
Good, so if you have any names,
So please email me,
PPI,
Program for Public Information.
yeah, I do have a couple of
Thank
names
you.
for you.
Mhm.
Okay.
senior vote.
Anything, any other questions on coastal resiliency? Okay, let's go to the Planning Commission 2018 Annual Report, which you should have gotten a copy of. I
had
have-
3 questions
Go
on
ahead,
this.
Mr. Watson.
On page 2,
Yes.
in 2018, the department looks forward to working on the following. Is that just cut and paste from last year's?
No, this was last year we didn't have a report.
Yeah.
This
Oh,
is the first
okay.
time.
Okay,
So
so then it should say in 2019.
is this what we're looking to do, or we've done? Okay, 2019.
2019.
Okay.
And then on the next page, you got my email wrong. If you can add after the D in Harold, add a D-O before the A.
So Harold D. Watson?
No,
Harold D-O-N-E.
D-O-A Watson.
Oh, okay.
2 Ds,
I'm sorry?
2 Ds.
Yeah.
And then on
HaroldddOA
N-E, Watson, sorry.
N-E Watson, okay.
Line has changed.
Oh, okay.
It's dan.cent. That's a dan.cent.
At GAF?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
And then on the next page, 4, in the second line, commission comprises, just cut out the of,
Okay.
5 regular members, each of whom is elected by the electorate of 4 planning districts 1 through 4, or something like that.
Okay, I would take out off. Comprises 5 regular members, one of whom is elected by the electorate of planning districts 1 to 5.
Also, just a little bit of housekeeping. It says that there are 3 alternate members that serve terms of 1, 2, and 3 years. I know we do, we have one opening, but could you let us know the 2 alternates and how many years they have? I know it's somewhere here, I saw it.
I don't think I have their time tenure specified there, so I will get back to you on
Yeah,
that.
that's cool, that's good.
And then on page 6, under the Greenway, consultants developed 2 options for promoting bike access from Main Street to Perry Street to Perry House. It's really from the existing bike the existing Greenway to Perry House, and then Barnum.
Existing Greenway at Main Street to Perry House and eventually to Barnum.
Yeah, I mean, you essentially, we're talking about half a mile versus a block.
Okay,
So I just think it's more,
okay,
it's a better statement if you add in all of that.
sure.
But otherwise, nice. Thank you.
And you didn't think we read it.
It's good that you're reading it. Keeps me motivated.
There you go. And I appreciate, I guess this is required, this annual report, and I've been on this committee 3 years now, and this is the first one I've ever seen, so good job
Thank
that we
you.
finally now have an annual report.
Of course, now you gotta
I won't repeat what Gail just said.
It is required by state statute, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have read it in there, and I was like, oh, really? I didn't know this.
Yes,
Thank you.
sure. Thank you.
Very good. I think those were small, minor details, but it's good to have an annual report. Do we have to vote to accept this?
You may want to, with minor changes to the draft like discussed, and then I will go ahead and make the changes.
Perfect.
motion that we approve the 2018 Stratford Planning Commission Annual Report with duly noted changes.
Okay.
Second?
Second by Mr.
Nope,
Vigliotti. Got to get faster, Mr. Watson.
We'll vote.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Saft, second by Mr. Vigliotti to accept the Planning Commission Annual Report with amendments or changes as we have indicated. Any further discussion? Otherwise, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? So it's unanimously accepted. Good job. Okay, other items. We have discussed a few times about advertising signage, LED or digital signage at a couple locations in town, West Broad and Paradise Green. At our last meeting, Karen Sportini of the Economic and Community Development Department gave us a sample rules and regulations policy from the town of Suffield?
I think it's Old Saybrook.
Old Saybrook. Had an S in it, I don't know. Old Saybrook. And so what I would like to do is ask Susmitha to go back to looking through the other towns and doing some research regarding other rules and regulations, and to also discuss that with the economic development and the police department, other departments that would want to have input into the rules and regulation, and come back with a report
Okay.
next month, 2 months?
Sure, I can do that. Hopefully, I'll have something ready for next month to just, start the process. I should also mention, Chairman, that I did receive a call from an interested party about putting up digital signage. They asked me if there are any regulations, and I said no, but Planning Commission is on it, and we are going to work on it.
How about that, we're ahead of the game. Good, thank you
All right.
for that, and thank you for putting the information together, and hopefully, next month or March, we can finalize some rules and regulations. As far as what the signs look like, I assume there would be some indication of the, maybe the minimum and maximum of the sign, but then the town can decide exactly what the digital sign itself looks like. I don't think we should get into too much of that.
Okay.
Let's just get the rules and regulations written and move forward from there. Any other questions on that? Otherwise, we'll go on to open space and watershed land acquisition program. And somewhere in here is information regarding that the Conservation Administrator and the 121st Assembly District Representative Joe Gresco has applied for open space and watershed land acquisition grant to acquire a property to the rear of 1850 Huntington Road, which there's a map in your packet. The subject property is an interior lot that abuts North End Park, AKA John Chanda Park, AKA Jim Dillon Field, and the intent to expand the existing park by acquiring 4.3 acres from the property owners. So they are asking us for a letter of recommendation, which I think is in the packet.
It's in there.
Yes, it is.
Lovely letter.
Yes, and this is a very time-sensitive matter, so I thought if the commission decides to support this, I would have the chairman sign this letter and give it to me right today, so I can take it back.
I have my pen ready, so. Any questions regarding this?
This is exactly what we should be doing.
It's,
Based on our first discussion tonight, this is exactly the kind of purchases we should be making. So I fully support this.
yeah. Good. There's nothing on this property, right?
Nope.
There's no house, anything, just, yeah.
I Googled it.
You Googled it?
I Googled it very carefully.
So anything that's Googled, we know is
I
right.
couldn't find anything there.
Okay. If there's no questions, could I have a motion?
So, I do have a question.
Okay, Mr. Sen.
So, by acquiring these from property owners, how many property owners are there? Oh, it's just one.
The Tomascos?
Moscow.
Oh, it's Tomascos. Okay. I didn't read that. Gotcha. Okay.
Do we have any idea what we're paying for it?
Right now, they're just applying for the grant, so once they get the grant, probably they will start.
They're paying whatever the grants comes in at.
Yeah. I just have to make a note that the chairman brought to my attention just now that the date on the letter is incorrect. So, if the commission decides to support this, maybe I would revise the date first thing tomorrow morning, and,
I'll come over and sign.
I can have her sign the letter after we revise the date, so it just doesn't look incorrect.
Okay. So I'll entertain a motion. Mr. Watts? Nope.
I move that we accept the town's open space watershed land acquisition grant program proposal, and that we empower our chairman to sign a letter in support.
Okay, can I have a second? Second. Mr. Vigliotti, you guys fighting it out over there? Okay, we have a motion and a second, and we'll just change that little date. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
With a question.
With a question.
Before I say aye. So, let's just say that they want $400,000 for this piece of property.
What is your question on that?
So my
So
question,
it's too much money.
yeah, my question is it a possibility with us approving this before we know what the financial ramifications are?
No,
Doesn't
because
matter?
They're going to give us a grant
I get that,
from the state.
yeah.
If we don't use it to buy that property, it goes back to the state. So my assumption is, whatever the grant is, if the owner isn't willing to take it at that price,
Yeah,
Well, also on the second page, it says if the town is awarded open space grant to acquire the subject property, the planning commission will have another more formal opportunity opportunity to review the property purchase via an 824 review. So at that time, you could question
Yes.
the amount. And hopefully the state will do their due diligence and make sure that the funding is the right amount. Does that? You approve, okay. So we now have a unanimous vote. Okay, great. Okay, now we go to members' comments and concerns. Any comments, concerns? Otherwise, I certainly will accept a motion to adjourn. So moved. So moved.
Seconded?
Second? By Mr. Watson? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Good job.